Thank you for staying with us. We'll now hit the road. We're already on the road, so let's start
And we're already
running on
running.
this route. Okay. So as the population shrinks in many parts of the world, is the population really shrinking? Nigeria,
COVID is taking a lot of people. That's why.
okay, as the population shrinks by reason of the pandemic, Nigeria, a developing country with a raging youth workforce, could become the ninth largest global economy, drastically changing the world order in 2000. And that's according to a modeling study by the University of Washington. This is coming just as the International Monetary Fund announced that the Nigerian economy would witness a deeper contraction of 5.4% and not the 3.4% it projected in April this year. But the global leader expects Nigeria's economy to rebound by 2.6% in 2021.
Amen to that.
Well, if it contracts by 5%, over 5%, it rebounds by 2.6%.
It's an improvement.
Okay. We have also been told that Nigeria's economy can't reach full potential without financial inclusion. You know, sometimes I let some of these terms that I use. I wonder, can that man selling bread relate, or the man selling tomato by the roadside? That relationship is what I'm hoping that our guest today can help us.
No, but the thing is that what is his contribution to GDP?
Is he not contributing?
Well,
We'll
the
find out.
economists are here.
Okay, so to help us answer all of these questions, here in Lagos, we have Johnson Chukwu, Managing Director of Cowrie Asset Management Limited. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And from our Abuja studio, we have Tokwe Fashua, an economist. Thank you for joining us.
And politician.
Okay, let me just start off with you, Tokwe. That question Alera and I attempted or came together to ask, the fact that Nigeria's economy would do better with effective financial inclusion, what role does that small scale businessman play in that situation?
Okay, I know you said Tokwe, but I know you are asking me so.
No, I'm looking at Tokwe right now. Tokwe?
So, yes, I'm with you. So the small-scale businessman plays a number of roles, apart from being part of the general economic machine. The GDP of a nation is computed as all goods and services sold within a nation, within a country in a given year. So even the little that he sells by the roadside makes it as part of the GDP. If he sells more, the GDP grows more. So that's the thing. When we talk about financial inclusion,
Tokwe,
what we're saying
just
is
wait.
the fact that...
Tokwe, hold on. Okay, hold on. So we're going to go on a quick break, but before we do that, I want Mr. Chukwu to just say a couple of words about that question.
Well, interestingly, those people on the roadside, the small and medium-scale enterprises, account for 48% of our GDP.
Okay.
And about 94% of our employment.
Okay, all right.
They do contribute.
Absolutely, almost 0.5% of what is produced in this country are contributed by them.
Okay, we'll go on a quick break and we'll be back to continue the conversation. Just stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We still have Mr. Tokwe Fashua from our Abuja studio and Johnson Chukwu here in our Lagos studio. Thank you, gentlemen. So before we went on that break, we asked a question which both you, Mr. Chukwu and Mr. Fashua, weighed in on, the impact or how much of impact the small businessman on the road has on the Nigerian economy. Now, both of you agreed on the fact that he contributes substantially. And Tokwe put it this way, if he sells more, then he contributes more. So the question now is, what do we need to do? Because we're talking about the Nigerian economy post-COVID, even within COVID. What do we need to do to keep this economy moving in the direction of a rebound?
The first thing I said is that they actually account for about 48% of economic activities and contribute 84%, it's actually 84%, not 94% of employment in the country. So if we want the economy to grow, we must incentivize that sector that accounts for more than close to 50% of our GDP. And how do we do that? We have to look at what are the constraining factors, what are the challenges they have. Some of the challenges that are very obvious is the issue of access to finance, because they find it difficult to get credit. Simply that they are small-scale enterprises. So they don't have, a lot of them don't have what you call collateral, what you use to secure your loan. So we need to modify our collateral system so that whatever they have can be used as security. We have to look at alternative methods that such small and medium-scale enterprises, such small-time operators can borrow money. Some of them have actually developed some informal systems, the institute scheme, the cooperative arrangement, where they contribute money and then lend to themselves. We have to find a way of integrating that into our financial system, so that through self-recognition, through counter guarantees by their members or family members, we can lend to them. Because the sector that accounts for 50% of your economic activities, you really can't, if you look at the distribution of credit in the country, I mean, the loans that are given out by banks, they get less than 5% of the entire loans, but they contribute 50% of economic activities.
No, one would think that because they, one would think that because they have so much of activity, they should be getting more of this. But is it a principle of the more you get, the more you have, the more is given to you, and the less you have, the more is taken away from you?
Yes, there's somebody that says, look, banking system is such that they always prefer to give to those who everybody wants to give money
established.
to, those who already have. And I did mention the issue of collateral. The bank is looking at, if I give you this one and the transaction fails, how do I, what will I attack to get back my money? Most of the small businesses don't have such money, such underlying assets. But they have something. Some of them have integrity. Some of them have experience. Some of them have a network of friends and family members that can guarantee, can stand in the gap for them. Some of them have properties, family land that that have not been, they don't have CFO.
Yeah.
But they are there, the assets. We can't attach those assets because we say, well, you can't use it. Some of them have movable assets. Some of them have motorcycles, which can also serve as collateral. I've seen, we need to look at what some other people have done. What they did in Bangladesh, what they're doing in Kenya, as in respect to how do you bring in the informal sector into the formal sector, so that we can provide those things that they lack and allow them to grow faster. Because if you take, for instance, the sector that accounts for half of your economic activities, should it start growing by at a faster rate, you know your economy will boom. Look at employment. I said that they employ 84% of the population. So it simply means that if we can incentivize them to grow, if we can encourage them to grow further, we will reduce the issue of unemployment.
Well, Mr. Chukwu, I would also imagine that the bank would also like to see some record of how their business is going. So we're talking about paperwork, you know.
Yes, my approach to it is this. Some of them are not well educated, so they may not have the ability
Keep records such that the bank would appreciate.
Yes, but two things we have to do. One is the issue of collateral emission. The other is I call it some form of mentorship or incubation process, where these small businesses, you can actually bring them together, form them into unions, into cooperatives, and then teach them how the skills they lack. And if you form them into cooperatives, they can pull resources together, and it becomes easy for you to assign maybe somebody from Ministry of Trade, somebody from Ministry of Industry, somebody from Ministry of Cooperatives, to help them provide some of these basic record keeping.
You said you.
No,
should,
when I
get
say,
them together and form cooperatives and unions. Who is the you?
When
please?
I say this, the government is an enabler in any society.
The government.
So we need to know the government has a responsibility to stimulate economic activities by providing the enabling environment, by providing the incentives. These incentives could include encouraging these small business operators to, one, acquire skills.
Ministry of Trade, for instance.
Ministry of Trade.
Yeah.
To acquire skills. Take, for instance, some of those people in the bakery industry, people in small-scale farming. I take it, for instance, in my village. Over time, they've improved their farming methods because the government came in and said, show them how to improve on some of those farming methods like rice cultivation, the aspects that relates to improve seedlings. They wouldn't sit on their own and know those things. They don't have capacity to go and read papers and see what's going on, new developments in their area. So it has to be, the sanitation services that some government used to do in the past. It seemed that has been put in abeyance. So a lot have to do with how government will help the small time operators, businesses to grow their businesses. I did mention the issue of collateral. I did mention the issue of skill acquisition. There are other things, such as helping them to share facilities. I give you an instance. I come from Abia State. There was a time in the 80s where the leather industry, the shoe industry in Aba was one of the biggest in Africa. People were coming from all parts of Africa to buy shoes in Aba. But what created it? Competition, the borders were opened. 2, infrastructural failure, power supply, issue of tariffs on some of their input materials. And then there was the reason why people can't even go to Aba today, there are no roads to get there. So if you provide some of this enabling environment like good road network, stable power supply, you can actually have island mode power generation so that in these clusters, that's where this will gather, you can provide them power supply so that you cut down their cost of operation. And then you will see them do more, they will produce more. So we need to find, when I say we, I'm talking of the government. And who is the government? You and I, what we're doing today is a contribution to that process. I mean, nudging the government to wakefulness, to realize that there are little things they can do that can stimulate economic activities and grow the economy. Because if you can grow the small and medium scale enterprises in the economy will boom. How did China grow? Look at some of the countries we used to laugh at. Look at what's happening in Malaysia.
Taiwan.
Look at Taiwan.
Hong Kong.
Of course, even Vietnam today has become a bastion of production. But we used to know of Vietcong and all those war. I mean, there was films we watched there. We are all replaying what happened in Vietnam. But today, Vietnam is growing at a very fast rate because the public sector, the government, have done one or two things to encourage the critical sectors of the economy. And today, the most critical sector we need to encourage is the small and medium scale enterprises, the small time operators.
Okay. Again, Mr. Chukwu has pointed out to one thing again, how the small and medium scale enterprise needs to be incentivized. In his words, we need to formalize the informal sector. When you spoke earlier, you said something about the more they do business, the more they will add to this. In the face of some of those business owners not being that well informed or educated, how can they do more? And then he is saying that government needs to do more to encourage them to go the route of contributing more to the economy. How would that work?
All right. First of all, I need to put this in context. You know, we're talking about growing the economy today, but I think the challenge before Nigeria and Nigerians today and the government especially is the task of stabilizing this economy right now and ensuring that it doesn't plummet into a black hole. If you look at all that has been happening around us with this effect of COVID and all of that, shutdowns, shut-ins, lockdowns, you know, and then tentative reopenings here and there. But if you look at our high streets, you see that a lot of shops are hollowing out. Some of the a lot of the plazas are hollowing out as well. Some of the businesses that have braved it and opened are finding out that, look, cash flow has dropped. Nobody is buying most of the things they sell and all of that. And that is ebbing, you know, into a kind of, if you like, a cul-de-sac. So the challenge right now may not be that of growing an economy for Nigeria than for stabilizing the economy. Like you rightly said, IMF has projected 5.4% dip in the economy, which is clearly a recession. The managers of our economy can struggle to try and limit that. And I can also quickly point to some of the things that they're doing, some of the intervention from CBN, from NISAL, from the federal government in general, including the 774,000 jobs that under KMO, they are proposing to provide. So what we can encourage them to do is to do a whole lot more of that, because it has to be all hands on board, struggling to ensure that this economy doesn't go into a black hole, into a downturn, from which you may be unable to recover the economy. And In fact, even the banks and the structured financial sector are also feeling the pinch. Many of the banks aren't booking new loans now. Because again, even if they book the new loans, how are you sure about the performance of the loans? How are you sure that the money is going to come back to you? Because the business is not just there to do, only a few sectors. And yesterday I was looking at the Financial Times, and they were talking about the 100 businesses that have done very well globally. A lot of them maybe belong in the pharmaceutical sector because, of course, it's sick season and people are buying drugs and all of that. And of course, then you are limited to that. And of course, you could see e-education, electronic education, companies involved in online education doing well, e-health, companies involved in telemedicine doing well. And of course, the rest are the big companies like Amazon and all of that. Those guys are well positioned. They are tech companies. They have a reach into everybody's pocket. So, but back to Nigeria, I would suggest that perhaps what we should be doing is to try to reimagine the economy from the ground up and say, we've got 200 million people. How well are we providing for these people? Food, shelter, clothing, the basics, all right? Water, electricity, the basics. So, and this is a good time for us to be able to reflect on that and have a big meeting and say, okay, how are we going to provide this for our people? How are we going to ensure that, if things go on a downturn, maybe again, or even in this period that we are, that our people are not hitting rock bottom immediately? Because unfortunately, a lot of businesses are closed down. A lot of businesses are still going to close down. If this extends for a little bit longer, it's going to be tough for Nigeria to cope. And that means that millions of Nigerians are losing their jobs, like Mr. Chukwu said. As a matter of fact, 41 million, according to Smedan, there are 41 million micro, small, and medium scale, businesses in Nigeria. 41 million, or even up to 43 million of such businesses. And meaning that a lot of Nigerians are in that sector. A lot of the employment is in that sector. How are they going to cope? How have they been coping? For how long can they continue to hold their breath? Then after which we can now say, okay, fine. If we can limit the fall of the GDP this year, if we can manage the economy at a certain plateau, if perhaps it's going to be the best we can achieve. If we're going to manage the economy at a certain plateau, then maybe in 2021 we'll be looking at, okay, fine. If this all blows over, how much of growth can we achieve? And how inclusive will that growth be? Before now, we talked about financial inclusion. In fact, I was thinking in terms of, perhaps we're thinking of economic inclusion. So financial inclusion actually talks about how many people have accounts, because we believe that if they have accounts, then it's easy, even if the government was doing cash transfer. If government says, listen, we're giving every poor person 5,000 naira today, and you don't have an account to receive that, what do? Of course, they can also give you cash, but it's neater if the government can transfer to you. Everybody has a BVN, and you can just do a single transfer and reach out to them. Even if government has to print and spend, this is the point where we are right now today. That even if government has to print and spend, we're in emergency. All right, so that's financial inclusion. But economic inclusion is what we should think about. When graduates leave school and don't have work to do and are losing jobs right now, that means they're taking out of the economy a lot of people. Millions of Nigerians are surviving on handouts. They're calling family, we can't feed yesterday, there's no food in the house, and all of that. So that's social capital, which we're feeding on. But in a matter of time, even those who have a little will begin to draw back and say, listen, I can't continue like this, just giving so much money out every day. And of course, that's when you see the social capital turning down. So I think, again, it's back to, encouraging government, because, again, government is back. One of the things we noticed the moment COVID came on board was, listen, in this season, one of the things is that government is back. Government is back everywhere. Government is back. A lot of private sector people are going to be talking about government, as the government should do this and do this for us. In the UK, for example, Virgin Airlines had to go back to government to get a bailout. All over the world, big companies are getting bailouts again. So it's just the sign of the times. It's wartime, different kind of war, but war all the same, So we're going to be going back to government and say, listen, how much more can you do? One of the things we've pointed out in the past is also that whereas the Nigerian government has taken some initiatives, but if we compare to what many other countries, especially in the Western world, have done, by GDP, we haven't done a lot, okay? Like in the US, that if they're talking about 15% of their GDP in the US, if US GDP was 20 billion, the US is ready to roll out about 3.5, I mean, I'm talking about trillion rather, roll about 3.5 trillion to incentivize the economy. And this is an economy that's already been established. So this is a time for us to break the bank and say, hey, what can we do? How can we rescue our people from food poverty, basic stuff like that? How can we ensure that at least we begin to think about the kind of houses that they live in? That is going to create some jobs as well, reorganize stuff. I like the initiative with Keyamo, if we can focus really on the environment. But I was thinking about how it will work, because 1,000 people in Lagos mainland, employed in Lagos mainland local government, is not the same as 1,000 people employed in a local government in Gusau. So, but of course, this is policy. It's not going to be perfect. Okay, you're probably going to need a lot more people in Lagos, in Ibadan, in Onitsha, in Port Harcourt, in Kano, in Maiduguri, for example, in Sokoto metropolis, than you would need in many other small local governments in Nigeria. So that 1,000, homogeneous kind of figure may not be entirely efficient. I hope they're able to look into that and recalibrate it, but we need to deal with these factors: our environment, our agricultural sector, our water sector. The last time I checked, there's nowhere in Nigeria where you can turn the tap and get government water, maybe apart from maybe Abuja. Most of the state, the water systems have broken down since they were built in the 70s and 80s and so on. So basic things like that. This is the time for us to deal with the human factor. Okay, the human factor, because no matter what we do, no matter what we say about the economy, it's down to the human factor. This is the time for us to improve the livelihoods of the average Nigerian on the streets so that they can be stronger and produce more. So that, I'll now round up very quickly, so that man on the street that you spoke about, Nota, who is selling something by the roadside, the challenge for him really is not to continue to sell the 500 naira or 5,000 naira wares that he's selling. The challenge for us as an economy is to produce a lot more so that the 5,000 naira things he's selling, he can, improve capacity to 50,000, to 100,000, so that, in fact, there'll be less people like him on the roadside. Things will be a bit more structured. His children can go to school and become something of them, themselves. That is it. So, as an economy, we're not producing nearly enough to meet the challenges of the moment. We're not producing nearly enough to incentivize our people to do a lot more and to be more profitable in whatever it is to do. We're not producing nearly enough.
Thank you. Talking about production, we're not producing nearly enough. But suddenly Nigeria is producing gold bars. Would that in any way help if we begin to look at the natural resources we have besides oil? Would that help to stabilize? Tokwe talked about stabilizing the economy as against growing the economy. But we'll look at all of that with these two gentlemen. We'll come back from this break. Do stay with us. Now, in the course of this week, the president received a gold bar from the CBN, part of the federal government, is it presidential artisanal initiative to improve the mining processes in the country. To also, but so that means we've been producing some of these things unofficially. Is this an attempt to formalize the production of some of these things? But hey, we still have Justin Chukwu and Tokwe Fashua here, and Alero has a question she wants to start off with. Alero.
Yes, Mr. Chukwu, the president recently reviewed our budget. Of what benefit is that to what we're talking about now? Is that going to help us grow our economy? Or what was the purpose of that exercise?
I think the primary purpose why the government reviewed the budget is to inject more liquidity into the economy, to adopt what we call a expansionary budget, to actually spend more than it can generate. And the concept is that when you put more money into the system, you are able to provide income to the citizens, so that those who would have lost their income from the formal employment will have alternative sources of income. And I think that's what the government tried to do. Basic thing here, what countries have done in the past is that if the economy goes into a recession or a depression, they spend out of that recession by spending money on public works, giving out contract to do roads, housing projects, schools. So a lot of people will now earn income, begin to spend. As they spend, those who are producing those items they buy will start producing. So that's a route to stimulating an economic recovery. And I think that's what informed the government decision to now increase the budget to 10.8 trillion naira, a deficit of almost 5 trillion naira. In fact, more than 5 trillion naira, because the revenue is about 4.8 trillion. I mean 5.8 trillion. So you're talking about a deficit of about 5.3 trillion. So the basic thing they are looking at that we have to basically print money. Apart from what they're borrowing, of course, they've gotten access to borrow about $5.5 billion. They also have a provision of about 850 billion naira borrowing plan. But beyond that, they will also spend by asking the central bank by borrowing from the central bank, which is basically to print money. That could lead to an uptick in inflation as we are seeing. But ultimately, the purpose is to ensure that government is spending on those small things that people can earn income. They will now go into beyond what they had planned to do. And I'm hoping that now that the budget has been signed into law, they will implement it. If you look at, for instance, the Economic Sustainability Report, where they made provision about 2.3 trillion naira expenditure, 1.1 trillion is coming from central bank. One of the key components that I expect the government to activate immediately to save the economy from further going into deeper recession is what they call survival fund. Among the four pillars they have for survival fund. The survival fund is supposed to be used to pay salaries of private sector employees who, during this period of COVID-19, are not in a position to pay their worker salaries, so that those people cannot go hungry. And that is supposed to come from the budget. It's beyond what they had planned earlier at the point the budget was prepared last year.
Because there was no COVID then.
Because there was no COVID. They also have a provision there to support the small and medium scale enterprises, where those who are producing like face masks, sanitizers, the government will create an off-taker arrangement for them. So once they produce, the government will buy from them. So that was also not in the budget. The expenditure we are doing on healthcare was not in the budget. I mean, significant part of it was not in the budget. So those are what was necessary the government to increase the amount of the government expenditure in the budget. Because without that, the economy will go into a deeper recession.
But Mr. Fashua, this survival fund that he's talking about, have you heard anything about it? Has it been activated? Because we see on social media a lot of people who are crying out to the public that they have not been paid for several months and people should please contribute to their survival.
For example, the private school teachers is one of this particularly badly hit demographic in our society today. A lot of the private schools, they haven't paid. And many times, a lot of the SMEs that we talk about, I mean, I'm sorry, our people are just like that sometimes. You don't even think about how your workers are surviving. You can't even say, okay, listen, let me pay you 30% or 50% of your salary. Yeah, the boss just sorts himself out. Everybody just walks away because, again, the business structure and the business model is very, very fragile. Remember that most of what we do is based on importation of machinery, importation of equipment, and of course, importation of merchandise itself. So, okay, for example, the moment the international logistics seized up, there was a time that even ships weren't moving. You couldn't even import stuff and bring it into the country. So what do? Everybody goes home. And even if you imported, what happened was you were not selling. So I think that, of course, there's a bit of education for the average Nigerian CEO to say that, look, the new challenge before you is not about looking good for the camera, but how well do you do with carrying along and showing a human face to your staff? So this initiative by government is a new one that hasn't been activated as far as I know, but they have already started to talk about it, like Mr. Johnson said. It also formed part of the budget and part of the deficit, the huge deficit that the budget is carrying right now. It's a great initiative, like I said. Look, the government cannot do nearly enough. However, we have to continue to encourage them to do more and more and more because until this war is over, it's not over. In fact, the economic aspect, we should ensure that it does not become a cancer. So whereas we're fighting the COVID on the health sector, on the health aspect, but the economic aspect can become a huge cancer, a huge, a metastasizing cancer that continues to just expand and take a lot of people down. Imagine that millions will lose their jobs, and after a while, if they don't have food to eat, what do? They get on the streets. And when they get on the streets, it gets very messy, because the government is also going to react and say, listen, we're doing everything we can. So before you know it, listen, the mobile police people start to shoot. And so you don't want to get into a scenario like that. Apart from that, communication is very key to let the people continue to know this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, and how we need your cooperation as well. So it has to come from both sides. So it's a great initiative that the government is coming up with to say, listen, we can also help you to pay salaries, but they have to be careful. A lot of the SME CEOs will collect that money and just pocket it and not call their people back. As a matter of fact, a lot of people that were asked to work from home in the beginning, when they say, okay, you know what, work from home, the next thing is the next month they tell you, listen, sorry, we can't do anything for you. Or they just stop communicating with you, then you're off the payroll. So, but this callousness is going to come back to us. So we have to be careful. Life is not as cut and dried as just telling people to buzz off. But listen, this is a global problem that's going on. We all have to work together. So government has to be very methodical. Another thing that, I thought we were going to speak about this initiative of GSI, Global Standing Instruction, which the central bank is also putting together about, ensuring that if they give loans to people, it is tied to their other accounts. So that's a way of building, personal finance and personal credit culture from the ground up, and I think it's something that, if it does take off, I'm in support of. Everything must be done from the credit perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, from an economic, general perspective. I talk about economic inclusion of our people. Everything must be done at this moment to ensure that this economy doesn't spiral into a deeper recession. Thank you.
Okay, Tokwe, I'll start off with you and come back to Mr. Chukwu here. That thing about being productive, yes, the government will have to some extent, print to spend, but we have resources. I mean, Nigeria has about 44 mineral deposits, including gold, iron ore, coal, tin, zinc, in more than 500 locations. I mean, someone even mentioned this morning that Nigeria has the main resource needed for the making of computer motherboards. So at the end of the day, with this kind of mineral resources that we have, some of them illegally mined for many years now, suddenly the CBN is presenting the president with a gold bar, 12.5 kilograms that the CBN bought at, let me get that figure correct, 268 million naira for a 12.5 kilogram gold bar. Now, what if we're able, check out that bar, what if we're able to focus, and now the federal government is talking about building the mining industry in Nigeria from a 0.3% contribution to the GDP to at least 3.5 or thereabout in 5 years. How feasible is that? Would that help in any way?
Oh, by all means, it will help. The component of mobile phones that you mentioned is called coltan, columbite and tantalite. It's in Nigeria here, somewhere. Anywhere in all those areas like Jos, like Taraba, like all of that, and usually, without being, in politics, what we see is we've got some Indians and some Chinese people who come, and what they do is they get these artisans to go into these mines and bring this stuff out for them, including the gold. There's a gold belt, like a line, more like, that comes from the south of Nigeria and goes to the north. That's why you will see some gold in Osun State, in Ife and Co. And if you trace that same line, that's what goes to Zamfara. And if you remember that in Zamfara, a lot of children were getting lead poisoning as a result of illegal mining of gold. All right. So now I think what the government is doing is to try and formalize that. You have even things like barite. Barite is also available in Benue State, in Plateau State, and barite is used in oil drilling. And in fact, part of the challenge is our oil sector. A lot of the international oil companies, they prefer to import the barite than to use our own local barite. So we got all these challenges. And of course, whereas I don't believe all we should just do is dig in the ground and bring out all these materials and just sell them, or these minerals and sell them. I believe that we should try and add value to whatever it is we bring. And I think that's what the government is trying to do now. I think what we're trying to do with the gold initiative is to displace some of the illegal middlemen who used to come and push our people into the bush to go and get some of these things for them. They were not actually very clear about how that gold was refined, because the last time I knew there was a lady that was trying to set up a gold refinery in Nigeria. I'm not sure whether they've completed that project. Some of these things take time, okay, and that was just before COVID. And so, however, one way or the other, this gold bar has been pieced together, and the economics about gold is that right now, gold price is skyrocketing in the international market because in an environment like this, people are losing confidence in currencies in general. And therefore say, listen, no matter how well the US dollar is doing, it's good to hold some gold, because if the entire global economy collapses, at least we can fall back on gold. We can go, perhaps the world will go back to what they call the gold standard. So this initiative is a very good initiative, in the sense that at least it calls attention back to our mineral resources, it calls attention back to what we have, it calls attention back to the need to add value to what we have. It tries to displace some of the informal, illegal arrangements that have been going on there, including, like I said earlier, the issue of lead poisoning to our children in Zamfara State and elsewhere, and tries to formalize the economy. So it's a good one. And I think that they should also take the same initiative for a lot of other, if you like, minerals in the solid mineral sector of this economy.
Okay, Mr. Chukwu, that process, is it something that can be picked up real quick?
Well, part of it could be you have to come up with a strategy that is both short-term and long-term. But I'm always an apostle that if you want to build an economy, you have to go for the long-term process. One, the central bank said, the government said the central bank will provide centers for offtake of buying of such gold. And then they will also work towards setting up a refining industry to refine the gold. So the basic thing is that the artisans will have who to offload the gold to at standard market prices. So it wouldn't be that they will be looking for who to smuggle it, or you won't have some smuggler coming in and taking the gold from them. And because you're going to have some level of formalization, the issues about people mining illegally will, to some extent, be addressed.
But let me just interrupt you there, if you don't mind. The question of why, first of all, we started out with just oil, and now we're going for gold. It appears that we're going for gold, one item. Wouldn't it be nice to spread and get all of this at once?
There's a Ministry of Solid Minerals whose primary objective is to develop the solid mineral sector. And it's
to
not
develop
just...
or to map out?
No, to develop. Totality. Mapping is just an integral part of that development process. You have to map up the cadastral zones and then obviously concession them and then get those people licensed to mine each of these solid minerals.
Mine and refine, or just mine?
Yeah, one, mine. Two is refine. But it's all about development, entire developmental chain. But like I did say earlier, one of the things that is lacking is that a lot of our processes are so ad hoc in nature. And therefore, now we don't look at the integrated nature of what we need to do. And I want to take us back to the history of this country. Gold mining actually started in Nigeria in 1903 in the north, and in 1904 in the southern protectorate. So the British government actually set up an agency to supervise gold mining in the north in 1903, and then south a year after. But go back to how Britain governed Nigeria and what happened. Some of the infrastructure development they had here was driven by raw materials that were meant for the British markets. The rail line that runs from Port Harcourt to Enugu was built solely to export coal. It was extended to Jos to export tin from Jos. And what did they do? Immediately they built the evacuation infrastructure. It became possible for that mining activity to actually take place. Because if you had mined the gold and you needed people to carry them on their head or bicycles because they didn't have good roads then, that mining process wouldn't have been effective. So what is lacking is that, are we building integrated infrastructure to support some of these raw materials? Take, for instance, a place like Kogi State where you have a lot of limestone deposits. By now, in any other country, we have a standard gauge rate that runs from Kogi to the southern seaports and the western seaports. We've not built that. Today, Dangote is trying to export cement, but we don't have a mechanism to export bulk cement in the country because we've not built bulk export terminals. Those are the reasons why other countries are progressing. We're moving at the slow speed because the key thing we have to think development in an integrated format. It's not just enough that they produce the gold. Where are we going to refine the gold? If you buy the gold off them and export them today, you have a lot of granite mining in the country. There's no single granite refining plant in the country. We cut the granite in huge slabs, send them out of the country, refine them, and bring them back to the country at a very expensive price. So why have we not been able to do that? There are a lot of granite deposits in Edo State, Ondo State, along that corridor. What's the evacuation method? Have we built power plants to support the process of setting up such refining plants near the point of raw material? So that, because without power, you really can't cut those stones.
You know, Mr. Chukwu, the amount of resources in this country is amazing. Cross River State has some of the most unique trees you can ever find around the world in Cross River State, apart from the mineral deposits they have there. But Imosa says there is a huge economy in the COVID crisis. It takes creativity and innovative thinking to benefit from it. This is the best time to attract foreign direct investment in all of these areas we've talked about. But as we wind down now, let me begin with you, Tokwe. Closing notes on, let's look at the loan situation. As we wind down, what can we do with that new idea that the idea that the CBN, you mentioned it earlier, the GIS thing, is it GSI? Yes.
Oh, well, the GSI thing, from what I've seen, well, it's a new initiative, really, because one would have thought with the hoopla around it recently that it was something that was backdated, that they would start to net off even past loans and all of that, from one bank account to the other. But what I've read so far, for such to work, there has to be a GSI mandate that will be signed by a borrower ab initio to say you have a right as a bank to take money from any of my accounts in any other bank, before this will work. So that alone means that it's going to be a difficult policy. It's controversial, but again, if a customer would append the GSI mandate and say that you can take money from any of my other accounts, then so be it. When Nigerians are resisting, and I can see a lot of lawyers dusting up their papers, this cannot work and all of that, but then the simple question is to ask someone is, why would you want to borrow money from one bank and not pay and have money in other banks? And so one other thing I'd like to see about that GSI is also the process by which it will be affirmed that someone has actually borrowed and has refused to pay, so that you can initiate the trigger, the GSI trigger. I didn't see that process there. Is it immediately
good to weigh in on this? Tokwe, thank you. Mr. Chukwu, in 10 seconds, ahead we were out of time.
Okay, I think one of the things we need to do is have an integrated identification management system, so that when you fail to pay your loan, you cannot borrow elsewhere. That's what happens in other countries. And that keeps people in checks. You can't borrow money from Bank A and go to Bank B if you have a bad credit record. People do everything on earth to make sure they keep their good credit record. We must have that. We must also enforce the bankruptcy law, so that when people are unable to pay their debt, you declare them bankrupt.
Okay,
we don't
thank
have
you.
Credit ratings in this country. That's the problem.
We do, but they're not using it. Good. Thank you very much. Tokwe Fashoran, economist, joined us from our Abuja studio, and Mr. Johnson Chukwu, Managing Director, Cowrie Asset Management Limited. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Sunrise will be back in a moment. Do stay with us.